For until you become as a savior, as a help to some soul that has lost hope, lost its way, ye do not fully comprehend the God within, the God without. Reading 11:58:14. What a wonderful way to start off the day. And this being our last day together, I always get quite melancholy. This work makes me a little melancholy anyway. But as a facilitator and someone who kind of feels responsibility for each and every one of you, that you have the experience that you'd like to have, that you're happy, that you feel at home here, I start feeling like a mom. And when you go, I start feeling like the mom has lost the children. But I know that you'll come back, and we have just so enjoyed having you. All the work, all the preparation that's gone into this by the staff, and all these incredible volunteers who have just worked so hard to make this a great experience for you, and I hope it has been. On behalf of the staff and our manager, our conference manager, Allison Parker Hedrick, we want to thank you for making this for us a valuable experience, and for being here and for making this such a worthwhile week. It's been, for me, you don't always get to see the fruits of your labor. I've become a sweeper in my house. I'm always sweeping, because when I need to relax, I start sweeping. I realize, I get something out of this. I can see something that's clean afterward. So, but with this job, I get the fruits of my labor when I look up and I see you smiling, I see you chatting with one another, I see you really in deep concentration, taking in information that's, you think is valuable enough to be here, spend your time, and that's going to propel you that much closer to your spiritual goals. That's the fruit of my labor. So thank you. Thank you for all the things that you've done to make this worthwhile for us, knowing that what we're doing here is fruitful. It's also, for me, I thank God every day that I have the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health to give me what I need to serve an organization whose primary purpose is to, advance people on their spiritual path. Because some people I know my age are dead, They don't get to do this, and some people don't have this opportunity. But for me, it's especially important, and you probably saw me get a little emotional when I was introducing Kevin the other day. So it sometimes comes over me quickly, because I've had some deep personal losses in my life, and this organization and the opportunity to serve other people have given me a purpose. And I encourage you all, through all any pain that you may have, to do that, to seek out something that gives you a feeling of you have purpose in this world, and that you're doing something for somebody else that makes them happy, that gives them a reason to go on as well. So thank you all. So we've got a wonderful speaker for you today, and many of you probably already know Peter Woodbury. He's been a student of Edgar Cayce since the late 1970s. He first learned of Edgar Cayce while he was in college at Harvard University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in psychology. He's also had a master's degree in social work from Boston University. He is an accomplished psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, and lecturer. He currently teaches at the ARE, Past Life Regression Certification Program. He's been on the staff at the ARE since 2006, and currently is in the Public Relations Department and now part of the faculty of Atlantic University. He leads ARE tours to sacred sites around the world. In fact, he just got back from a most incredible tour to Peru, which I think he was talking to you about the other day. I kept seeing these pictures, and I just couldn't believe all the things that they were doing, because it really was apart from other tours, I think, because of the involvement of the spiritual people that he met and introduced to our tour people. So I highly, recommend it if you ever have a desire to go. He's a great leader. And he has written many articles for the Venture Inward magazine. He is fluent in 3 languages. He also finds time to portray Edgar Cayce in the acclaimed one-man show, An Evening with Edgar Cayce. And he probably gets tired of hearing me talk about this, and I'm sure, if you've been in other conferences, you've heard me talk about this. And it's just an amazing experience because I've never heard Edgar Cayce. I've never really seen footage. But the first time I saw this, and the only time I ever saw this show, I was transported to another time and place. I actually felt like I was seeing and hearing Edgar Cayce. He is that good at this. So if you ever get a chance to hear him do that, run, don't walk to that performance. His website is peterwoodbury.woodpress.com. And also an interesting factor, and I'm happy to think this, that we may have him for a very long time because he's... his great-grandmother was a medium, and she lived to be 107 years old. So, so with no further ado, please welcome Peter Woodbury.
Thank you, Barbara. Ooh. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you all today? I was a little late because I was trying to find a matching finger brace. Because this is being live streamed around the world, or at least to places where my relatives live, which is sort of around the world. I injured my finger. It's a common injury here at the ARE. It comes from over-praying. We get sprained fingers, and so moderation in all things. I have to learn that. So what a wonderful Congress. I've been able to attend all the morning lectures and some of the evening ones, and I thought, what a great start with the pride and joy of Hopkinsville, William Turner, and Lena Kellum. Is that? Alyssa Keller. Weren't they great? Were they wonderful? Alyssa is already booked in Houston in the fall, so her stock is rising. Sign up now. And then what came next was John's talk, and Kirk, was he the next speaker? Kirk Nelson. I'd never heard of that theory of the internal building of the pyramid and the moving pieces. It's just very like the human mind to want to take it apart and then say, how do we get this thing back together now? We've taken it down. Laughing is optional. And then Kathy Callahan with her talk. So I just think it's been a great Congress, and I'm happy to be here just wrapping it up. Maybe I'm the closer of this event. Well, just a shout out, I want to not just my family who's out there in TV land, my Reiki healer who's been busy at work helping me, and her mom Diana are tuning in. So just a little shout out to them. I'm so glad we had this time together. Remember Carol Burnett, all that. Okay, let me see how I can work a clicker with this energy. So I would have to say that this is, of all the topics that I love from the Cayce material, the material on Jesus is probably the most personally revelatory for myself. Many of you know my history. I was born and raised a Catholic, and I don't consider myself a recovering Catholic. It was I enjoyed very much having a religion class and being able to ask questions about my growing faith, and I had a very deep relationship with Jesus as a child. And then around adolescence, we kind of grew apart. I kind of didn't know if I could follow that path. But it was still very profound, very much close with Jesus and his work. And then when I went to college, my first class was on folklore and mythology. And in that class, I learned about creation mythology and Immaculate Conception mythology, and you can see where that's going. that course was transformed my faith in Jesus into something like the Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. That it just was a nice story that a child believes, and the reality is very, very different. And so what they found with education is that your faith and your religious belief go down. The more educated you are, the less faith and religion religion appeals to you. And I found that a sad reality. I think you replace faith with science. And I think science is really a great tool, but I think to expect science to take the place that faith can is just very unrealistic. I oftentimes quote Dostoevsky, and the person that doesn't bow their head to something greater than themselves is destined to be crushed by the weight of their own being. And I think that's partly what was happening to me. I was becoming wonderfully rational and logical. But luckily, as you heard, I had a strong metaphysical influence in my life, predominantly from my great-grandmother. So I was always interested in the powers beyond the mind, kind of what's beyond the five senses. And in college, I learned about Edgar Cayce. I didn't have the time at that time to really explore it. And then after graduate school, I went to a series of lectures given by Harmon Brough. And there, I was reintroduced to the work of Edgar Cayce in a very deep and profound way. There's no need for blind faith when it comes to the Cayce work. You're allowed to bring your mind. You're allowed to think. Harmon Brough was present for readings, for hundreds of readings for over a year, and he asked very incisive questions, and he was never turned away. Answers were always given. They were hard to understand, but we were allowed to think and to reason, and this stuff makes sense. And so in this process of finding Edgar Cayce, Jesus was brought back, not only brought back to life, but in a way just incredibly expanded. I think I was fortunate that I found Edgar Cayce when I was in my 30s, because I had moved from mere Christianity to looking at other faith traditions. I had learned how to meditate. I had learned about Buddhism. And these elements of understanding God were not really connected until I came to Edgar Cayce. I don't think that there's anything that new in the work of Edgar Cayce, but the way that it's synthesized, I found new and very, very compelling. Edgar Cayce is known as the father of holistic medicine, but I invite you to also think of him as the father of holistic theology, meaning that the New Age movement is this movement where we've tired of the franchising of God. We're tired of my God can beat up your God, or my God has the penthouse ticket to heaven. And Edgar Cayce's work in the New Age movement says God is the God of all people. Edgar Cayce himself was confused by the references to other great teachers, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Buddha. And the question was asked of Edgar Cayce in trance, what's the best religion? And the answer came back in that typical application sort of way. The best religion is the one that you'll actually practice. Try that out and see. And I just love that answer. I think that's the New Age. You know, it's not a religion. It's a place where you come from all different religions. We're all touching the elephant at different places. And if there's a holistic view that includes all of that, and I think that's what Edgar Cayce tried to bring forward to our mind, this holistic view of God. And 2,000 or so years ago, I think Jesus also was inviting us to look at a holistic view of our Creator. So let's begin. I don't know why I point at the screen. It's in there. So I think that it's hard to find, I think, a depiction of Jesus that resonates. You know, I want to it's my personal strong feeling that everyone here has known Jesus, knows him currently, has known him in his life as the master. You know, I'd ask for a show of hands, but I know that many of you wouldn't put your hands up because you're humble about that. But if you're involved in the work of Edgar Cayce, you're involved in the work of the master. And as I'll be giving you my thoughts and views, but that is in no way to replace your thoughts or views. I do a lot of family therapy, and you talk to one child and the other sibling. Each sibling has a completely different experience of what that family was like. One would say, Mom was really a pain, Dad was wonderful. What are you talking about? Dad was a pain, Mom was wonderful. The other one will say both were terrible, and the last one will say they were both great. And they're all right from their perspective. Cayce was big on truth coming from a perspective. When he was asked about the Aquarian gospel of Christ, was that true? And his answer was, it's true from the perspective of Levi. From Levi's view, that story is correct, is true. And so this is my story of Jesus, what I've put together. But in no way is it to take away your view, your experience of him. You all know him very, very well. And I'm here to talk about my view, and hopefully we'll have some opportunity to share perspectives and perhaps come to that holistic view of this man who walked the earth 2,000 years ago. Now, some of you are here from Boston, and you remember James Kyle. James Kyle was a foundational person in my life. He wrote a book on the Encyclopedia of Dream Interpretation. It's in the bookstore. And he and I ran a dream study group for a few years. And he told me a story about a time in his life where he was attending to his mother. His mother was very, very ill, and she was in that last stage. They just sent home to die in peace. And so he had been attending to her, and he had lost track of how long he had been awake. He didn't know if it was a day, several days. He just knew that at some point he was exhausted. And he lay down on a sofa just at the end of her bed. And he slept, and when he opened his eyes, he told me that he saw this beautiful, not this one, but he saw a beautiful image. He saw Jesus in a close-up, the way you might see him in the old-time movie theaters. And he said he thought in his mind, what a beautiful man. And then he said the image transformed, and it was an image of himself. And he heard Jesus say to him, that's how beautiful you are to me. And I share that story because I think that's all of our story. I think that all of us are in a process of saying, is that true? Are we that beautiful? Are we children of the Most High? Are we that loved and that honored? And I think the truth is, of course you are. But we're slowly kind of walking into that inheritance. We're all prodigal children, and we've all made our way into this earth and gotten lost and had a lot of fun and regret some things. But we're all the prodigal children making our way back. Will we be accepted? Are we still loved? Are we still cared for? And of course we are. That's the message that Edgar Cayce makes quite clear in this story. The one who came so that we might have life, not just life, but have it more abundantly. John 10:10. Hugh Lynn Cayce, when he would speak, he would say, I don't work for the ARE. I work for a man named Jesus Christ. And I just think that's, if you follow Cayce, I think Cayce would have said that too. We're all in that lineage. The 5 most important lives of Edgar Cayce included his time in Palestine, but also his work here as Edgar Cayce. So I think that this work that we're all part of is incredibly important. It's part of this Christ mission. And so we're going to be talking about Jesus, the Aquarian, going from the Piscean to the Aquarian Age, and this quote that he says when he's telling the apostles about the Last Supper. He says, you'll know the way, follow the water bearer. The water bearer will take you to the place. So I'd like to work, Jesus worked a lot with parables and images, almost like interpreting dreams. And I think he was telling the apostles something esoteric in that message, follow the water bearer. Now, I do a day-long talk about creation, and probably most of you have heard it and are thinking, oh, hopefully he doesn't do that one again. So no worries. I'm going to summarize this story quickly. Carl Jung talked about how when a group loses its creation mythology, its creation story, it gets very lost. It's in a way like when an individual loses its connection and the mind is unfettered or the mind becomes loosened, we get into all kinds of trouble. The cure to all our ails is reconnecting spiritually. But when a group disconnects, that group suffers that same sort of destiny. You can look at, let's say, the native people of the Americas and how they were in many ways disconnected from their creation story, and how the sad path that they've taken now to come back, to reconnect with their creation story. And I think we also, as a Western people, have in many ways disconnected from our creation story. When you disconnect from your creation story, you disconnect from a large part of the meaning that life is to have. And so Cayce's version of the creation story is, in a nutshell, we come from a oneness with our Creator. And we've been created in a way in consciousness. So we've always been one with the Creator. But it's a bit like all of the cells of your body. They might not be aware of themselves as cells of your body. Well, Cayce says every cell of your body does have a consciousness, but it's not, perhaps in some of us, it's more of an integrated consciousness. But this experiment with the Creator is that we're given free will, and like prodigal children given run of the mansion, all those states of consciousness, we're given freedom to explore all of creation. Some of us make our way to earth. Learning happens through discrepancy. So earth offers a lot of things that are new to the spiritual soul. We begin to create new language. The earth is material. We are spiritual. The earth is moving into gender. The soul is androgynous. When we're in the earth, we experience emotions. In soul consciousness, we experience levels of consciousness. So all of these differences drew the soul into the earth. Now, this first involution, with its creative ability, began to work with evolution. I remember in my Catholic upbringing, I had religion class where we were told we fell out of the sky, Adam and Eve. And then I had science classes that were talking about Darwin and the evolution of the species and the ape form evolving into the human form. So it was a little bit of a schizophrenic kind of education. The nuns and priests didn't want to hear about what we were learning in science class, and it was the other way. It was like mom and dad didn't talk to each other, but that's another story. And so the story that Cayce says is that, was there evolution or was there creation? His answer is yes, there was both. This first involution came and steered evolution. It steered the development from the ape form into a human form. But that first involution got very caught up in materiality. Eventually got caught up in kind of the most entrenching kind of non-spiritual aspect, which is selfishness. Thinking complete loss of a sense of oneness. Me and mine versus you and yours, and I'm not going to share, I'm going to exploit you. That becomes a loss of spiritual consciousness. And so this first group got very caught up in the materiality. Then there was actually a debate among those that had not incarnated. There's a debate about what to do with this. And they said, first there was a projection into matter. Emilius, a previous semi-incarnation of the master, kind of projecting, trying to help people without actually being there. It's like getting advice from a virtual person, kind of trying to, and that didn't work. And so then there was the second idea about, we're going to need to come in. We're going to need to have ground forces, troops on the ground, to work with these people. And the thought was, well, you do it. No, I'm not going to do it. You do it. I've seen that. Look, I know that soul that's doing that. He was a great soul on this side. He's getting caught up in that drama, and that became the story of the lost sheep. What shepherd who's lost one sheep would not risk the other 99 to go and find the lost sheep? You know who that makes no sense to? Shepherds. Yeah. Tom Baker used to be a rural pastor, and he says when he would preach that sermon, he said afterwards a couple of shepherds would say, "There's no shepherd that's going to risk 99 sheep for one. You're going to just cut your losses and move on. This is a strange story." And Jesus was preaching to shepherds. He knew that was a strange story, but it was about love and it was about oneness. And that's what he did. That's what he represented. He went in to save even one. That the thought before the second involution was, if one soul can get lost in this maze of the earth, then all souls can get lost in that maze. And so he came in a way to break that paradigm, to show that as difficult as the earth is with its kind of material gravity, it is possible to live a spiritual life, to stay connected with your Creator while you're incarnate. Now, what I learned in Catholic school was that Jesus had Mary and Joseph as his parents, and he just came born in the manger and had an incredible life kind of in this situation. Cayce's story, you know the story. It blows that out of the water. There was so much planning that was involved before there could possibly be the incarnation of the Messiah. There had to be other religions. Jesus was part of, was it Zoroastrianism? He was part of Indian. These are places Cayce said he visited in those supposed lost years of the Master. So there was this tremendous planning. And if you really get into the spirit of this story, you get this sense of the pure love that this soul had for all of us. You know, the one that came to serve and not be served. That was his prayer in his incarnation as the Master was, others, Lord, others. Others, Lord, others. I'm not here for me. I'm here to show a way out. That's been my plan throughout these 33 incarnations that he supposedly had to create the way out. And so we are all, Edgar Cayce was part of that initial involution. You know, the Adam and Eve story is a symbolic story of the created souls coming in. You know, did you ever wonder if these were the first souls of creation, when they're cast out of Eden, why does it say that they go to join the others? Isn't that puzzling? Like they're the first ones. Where do these others come from? So it gives you a sense that they were the first of a different involution, different coming in. And so the wheel of karma, reaping what you've sown, that's just part of what's kind of dug the hole deeper for this first incarnation. The second incarnation comes to show the way out. Now the story that's doesn't quite resonate with me, or resonates in a different way, is this thought that the incarnation into the earth, that it was rebellion. And it almost kind of talks about rebellion as being a very negative thing. Now, as a psychologist, and Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud, she focused on child psychology and adolescent development. And what she talked about is that if an adolescent doesn't rebel, there's going to be trouble. Because the suppressed rebellion in adolescence, it's going to have to come out. And if it comes out when you're 30, you can get in a lot more trouble than when you're 16. And 16, you can stay out all night. When you're 30, you can spend a forgotten weekend in Las Vegas. You get it done. And the rebellion is a part of, this is what I've been taught. This is the way I've been raised. I'm going to experiment with the opposite of that. You know, did you see that? You know, the best way to create a fundamental religious child is raise them in Cayce. Like, oh, Cayce stuff, I'm going to become totally devout to a rigid religion. Or if you raise them in a rigid religion, they're going to rebel and start coming to the Cayce group. You know, there's that need to kind of say, I'm not that. And then eventually there's an integration. You know, it's the story of which one is that, with the porridge? You know, Goldilocks, yeah, where it's like you got to go too hot, you know, you walk on the wild side a little while, and then you say, no, I better go to the monastery, and you get a little too cold, and then you find the middle path. So this story that this rebellion was somehow wrong, I don't agree with. And so this involution, the second involution that Adam and Eve created, it talks about how it weren't supposed to really cross with the humanoid race. You know, it's supposed to stay elite. You know, we're going to teach you in Earth, but we're not going to touch you. Well, that kind of changed. Now, the reason I think it's important that there was this union of the created and the earthly was because the created involution came with the spiritual centers, the chakras. It's kind of our spiritual LoJack system. And as they crossed with the tailbone beings, you know, that became part of us. You know, it's a great country and western song. You know, Daddy was a monkey and Mama was from heaven. You know, that's what we are. We've got the spiritual centers, and we've got tailbones. We are the mix. And I think that when you look at Jesus being immaculately conceived or born, Heavenly Father, that's us, because we have the earthly and we have the divine. Just as Jesus came to show, this is all of us. I am you. I'm half human and I'm half divine, just like all of you. That we come from both involutions, where the opposites meet. And Carl Jung was my guide before I met Edgar Cayce. And so if you want to find a psychologist that resonates with this holistic, collective view, I recommend you look at the work of Carl Jung. There's so much that Jung expresses that Cayce just puts in different language. I love this quote where he says, the one primarily in need of redemption is not man, it's the deity that has fallen to sleep inside of man, in matter. And so what's happened is that we have this collective soul consciousness, the many mansions. That's where we come from. And we've moved from many mansions into a 3-bedroom apartment. And so in order to do that, you have to put a lot into storage. And we've put so much into storage that's the unconscious mind. We forget about that. The story of our involution is a story of amnesia and forgetting. And so Jung is saying here, it's about awakening what's asleep. It's not about putting anything else into somebody or into the consciousness. It's just about awakening what's already dormant. And does Cayce have anything to say about that? This is what he says. He says we have a pattern in our mind which has fallen asleep, but it has to be awakened by our choices. And what is it that needs to be awakened? Our oneness with our Creator. That's essentially what we've forgotten. That's essentially what every avatar, Jesus, is trying to remind us of, that we come from oneness. The problems of the world would be solved if we would just understand oneness, if we would just think of what that means. And it's challenging. I keep trying to kind of wrestle with what does oneness really mean? Like, when you look at good and evil, is that one? I would say yes, but what I'm wrestling with, they don't have to be the same to be one. Good and evil can be different in some ways, but they can be one. One requires the other because of that, that if everything you see is white, it doesn't exist. It's when there's black that it becomes a discrepancy, and then it comes into consciousness. And there's something about being on the earth in this duality that in order to experience one thing, we need that which is not that. That isn't, Cayce says, in soul reality, we're talking about levels of consciousness. We're not talking about physical differences, discrepancies, as we are here. But just back to this idea of what is it we're awakening, this oneness. And this is what Cayce calls the Christ consciousness, is this pattern that we're trying to awaken. And there's nobody's name here. It's not the Jesus pattern. It's not the Buddha. It's not the Muhammad pattern. And let's say if you were a student and you're trying to understand this concept, you'd say, okay, we've got something that's asleep that we got to wake up and has to do with oneness. Can you give us an example? What would this look like if it actually happened? And the example from Edgar Cayce's readings, from my experience, is Jesus. Jesus is the living example of the awakening of the oneness consciousness. Now, I'm not putting Jesus in any kind of spiritual hierarchy. In no way am I doing that. The consciousness has worked through all of these great teachers. Like, for example, when we think about forgiveness, forgiveness is a very high level. I think it's the highest level of release of karma and moving into grace. But you can't teach or understand forgiveness until you've gotten through compassion. And so Buddha spent his whole life preparing for helping us understand what's to come next. And then Buddha taught about meditation. Did Jesus know how to meditate? Of course he did. Cayce says it's referenced when he says, I eat of the meat that you know not of. That he was a yogi. He had spent, of the places in those lost years, he spent the longest time in India. So of course he was learned in meditation and yogic practices. So awakening this pattern, and it being the Christ consciousness, meaning that we're all, when Jesus, probably the most disturbing moment that I had as a Christian, and many of us have, is no one gets to the Father but through me. Wow. That just seems so ego-filled. And then all these, people that have never heard, is that a God that I want to worship? That, you got to go through this guy. He sells tickets to heaven. You don't go through. If you haven't heard about him, I'm sorry. Reincarnate and find out about him. And Cayce makes it quite clear that nobody gets to the Father. When Jesus is speaking there, he is now channeling, for lack of a better word, he is now Christ illuminated. No one gets to God but through this, awakening this pattern. It didn't have to do with Jesus the man. It's Christ the pattern. We all need to awaken this pattern, whether you're a Buddhist or whether you're a Muslim or whether you're whatever it is. We get so caught up in names. I've met atheists that I would take a sword for, and I've met Christians that, really? We call ourselves many things, but what is it that we actually do? And you don't need to, I think Jesus can help you with this, but I think you can awaken this pattern in other ways. I think there's, anyway, I only have an hour and 20 minutes. So this about oneness. It's not something that you should just kind of think about for 20 minutes. He talks about 6 months of really trying to work what oneness means. How is it all one? And how do you make sense of that? How can you resonate? If that's the pattern that you're trying to awaken, if that's the ticket kind of to enlightenment and to soul consciousness, how might you wrestle with that? There's a Cayce reading where he says, if you don't see that whom you worship in the least of you, you haven't even begun your spiritual work. Whenever I would read that, I would be like, oh my God, I've been doing this for how many years? And now I haven't even begun because that guy or that woman, I don't see God in them. I'm sorry. It's just like the soul, I think that's a walkout. The soul walked out of that person. And it's been this work. The readings talk about that everybody has that. And no matter how much they've got caught up in the other stuff, can you see that somewhere in there is the sleeping deity? Everybody, can you see that sleeping beauty that's in that person that is so hard to love? And can you do something in that moment, in that day, that might waken, that just maybe ring the little bell or something to awaken that sleeping deity that's in all of us? So this soul came in to wake us up. And he comes in a particular age, the Piscean age. Now let's look at what's meant by the Piscean age and what's meant by these astrological influences on the earth. Now, Carl Jung, again, he got interested in metaphysics. And I think it's wonderful when you get one of these incisive minds kind of looking at something metaphysical. Carl Jung, if you read his biography, when he was about 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6, he overheard a conversation about his father, and his father was worried about how he wasn't doing well in school. How do you worry about a 6-year-old? What was he, flunking finger painting? But anyway, they were expressing concern about little Carl not doing as well as they would hope at age 6. I guess the family tradition was that you had memorized the Bible or something by then, but he wasn't doing that. But Carl Jung said that he overheard that, and he started getting up at 4 in the morning and getting to work. And that became, if you look at the life story of Carl Jung, it's just an amazing soul, an amazing mind, just incisive, creative, illuminated. He believed in reincarnation. He was concerned about his credibility, much like Edgar Cayce was. And then after a near-death experience, he said, to heck with that. I'm just going to be me. I'm just going to say what I believe. And so he looked at astrology and the Piscean age. And what he talks about is that sometimes we think of Pisces as the age of one fish. And he says it's 2 fish. There's even the astrological symbol for Pisces used to involve the 2 fish, not just the one. And what he proceeded to do is to plot time throughout these fish. Kind of what was going on in the earth if we look at this, the influences of this age. I'll come back. I just threw this in from the talk by Kirk. And he's an astrologer, and he did Jesus's chart. And it's so interesting because, Jesus is coming in to herald the Aquarian Age, kind of on the cusp, or bringing that in. But he's born at the cusp of the Aries and the Piscean Age. And you see how much astrology he bears from Aries and Pisces. He's got Mars and Aries. That's your action style. And you can see sometimes Jesus acted like an Aries. When he throws out the money lenders, there was that Aryan energy coming through him. But I think that he had to resonate with the Aries energy to reach the people. You see, one of the main reasons that people had a difficult time accepting Jesus as a liberator is that they expected an Aryan liberator. They expected a liberator that would come with violence. And here's this guy, he comes into Jerusalem on a donkey? Are you kidding me? This guy's coming in on a donkey, he's riding side saddle? Like, that's just not what they were expecting. And even if you look at the controversy about Judas, Cayce's version was that Judas was a zealot, and he had seen Jesus get out of many, many situations. And he thought that Jesus just needed a little push, and then he would become this violent liberator. And Judas was incorrect, and he realized that. That's why he, in the story, and Cayce agrees with it, that he kills himself at the end. He realizes that this guy came to liberate in a very unique way that was going to take a long time for people to understand. It wasn't with violence, it was with love. But with that little aside. So the constellation of Pisces here, again, it's the two fish, and the Piscean energy as a fish has to do with the subconscious mind. When you dream, symbols have fish or the ocean or water in it. It's about subconsciousness. And then you see that the constellation has to do with duality. And Jung, in a nutshell, Jung talks about this as being the age of the self. And this is the selfless kind of Christ message. And then it moves into the age of, Jesus was pretty cool, but so am I. So am I. Look at the things I can do. The Renaissance, the age of enlightenment. It becomes about self-glory and self-aggrandizement. So it's this balancing, the selfless and then the selfish. And that's where the next one comes in. Cayce, diet, eat plenty of food, but avoid the self. Oh, that's a good one. So just back to that. There's two fish in a nutshell, kind of the selfless and then the self-aggrandizing or the knowledge, the self-expression. And then let's look at the influence of the Pisceans in this work. Cayce says that Jesus was born on March 19th, and then Mr. Cayce himself was born on the 18th. Hugh Lynn born on the 16th. So this work is firmly grounded in Piscean energies. One of the things you have to be careful with, the Piscean has to do with self-sacrifice, because it's about the self, and it's about selflessness. And Edgar Cayce, his reading said he could live to be 100. And he said, it was okay that I gave my life for my friends, just like my master did. That self-sacrificing aspect. But these are the aspects of Pisces: emotional, intuitive, self-sacrificing, kind of very subconscious oriented. Now this is a diagram that I found recently, and I just like how it's a plot of looking at all of the ages. Here's the age of Leo, which Cayce put at 10,500 BC, that the Sphinx was facing the ascending constellation of Leo. And then some of these would not coincide. By just moving through, here's Adam. This Cayce put Adam and Noah well before this, the flood, well before 10,000 BC. But here you have Christ coming in, heralding in the age of Pisces. As we move, this is the age of Kevin Tedeschi that's coming in to birth the Aquarian. I'm glad you got that joke. But this is, the worldliness, and then here, this movement into the light. And this would coincide, and I'll talk about later, with the correlations with the Mayan prophecies of 2012 and galactic years. This would, 25,000 years is the time that it takes for our galaxy to make one rotation. Just like our Earth takes one day, 24 hours to make or the 365 days to make a rotation. The galaxy takes 25,000 years. And they put 2012 as this moment of coming into the light and coming into the daybreak. Very paralleled with other astrology and Edgar Cayce. All right, I always like to put a reading in, and then it just helps people appreciate people like me. So let's look at a reading. And if people got time, I think we'll go to about 4 o'clock on the first couple sentences here. So here's this reading, and we'll pretend you're in class. We're going to study this reading. The question is, what will the Aquarian Age mean to mankind in regards to physical, mental, and spiritual development? Is the Aquarian Age described as the age of the lily, and why? And then here's Cayce's answer, and I think the Archangel Michael was nearby. Michael was a little bit kind of harsh, kind of like, ye sons of men. So the answer becomes, do you think I can answer this in a word? I was talking to Paul, and it would be like somebody coming up to me at a cocktail party and saying, can you explain physics to me? It's just like, physics? And, what do you want me to say about how do you explain physics? It says, you think you can answer this in a word? And so it starts. It says, well, Aquarian Age, let's start with growth. Maybe you can understand growing. There's a seed, and you water the seed, and something starts to sprout. These are as growths. What meant that awareness as just indicated? How does this relate to what we're talking about? In the Piscean Age, in the center of same, dead center in the Piscean Age, we had the entrance of Emmanuel, or God among men. This is God on earth, meaning Jesus. It says, in the center of this Piscean Age, you had this man named Jesus come in. What did that mean? The same will be meant by the full consciousness of the ability to communicate with or be aware of the relationship to the creative forces and the uses of same in material environs. What I understand here is he's saying that Jesus came to show what is possible as in a human form. Came to show what a human can channel of God on the earth. He says that he never said that was just him. He said, greater things will you do. I'm just trailblazing here. As you guys get the hang of it, greater things you will do. And then it says, this awareness was available at the age of Atlantis and Lemuria. But what did it bring? Now you remember John was talking about how in Atlantis, a current human would have such a hard time comprehending the spiritual, psychic ability of an Atlantean that was average. But he said, what did it do? What did you guys do with your Christ consciousness? He said, you used it for destruction and for selfishness. He said, wow, look at all this energy I have. Oh, well, maybe I should fill my barn with beer and pizza and, meet some girls. It became used for selfishness, for self-aggrandizement. And so that became the fall. It was the coming close to the Christ consciousness. But, it's like having keys to the Ferrari and not exactly driving responsibly with that energy. I think you can follow me here. And it says, then, as to what will these be, only those who accept same will even become aware of what's going on about them. Here he says, you want to know about the Aquarian Age? There's probably about 9 of you on Earth that are even going to be aware of it. That's because it's a subtle energy. And he says, most of you are, Hughlin used to say, you have one choice today. You're going to meditate. What does meditation do? It makes you sensitive to spiritual energies. He says, you're not meditating. It's like you're asleep. You're just sleepwalking through all of this stuff. So there's a frustration in the tone of this answer. You know, it's almost like you're asking questions that most of you will never do. Now, as an aside, it's interesting to look at the balancing aspects of things. You know, when we had our civil rights movement in the United States, there was Martin Luther King as the Christ peace energy, and then there was Malcolm X as the physical, by any means necessary kind of energy, and they formed kind of a polarity. Now, as you may know, Malcolm X eventually spiritualized his consciousness, and then he was killed. You know, his followers didn't like the new improved Malcolm X. Now, if you look at India, you had Gandhi, who was that spiritual, nonviolent element, but he had Aurobindo as his counterpart, who was, no, we're going to liberate India by violence. After Gandhi passes away, Aurobindo has a spiritual awakening and becomes Sri Aurobindo. And ARE has been to Aurobindo, his ashram. He's since passed away, but been to it many, many times. And it's so fascinating when you see correlations between Cayce's work and other masters. One of the things he wrote about is he said, in 1958, the energy of the world changed. He says it was like a cloak fell. He said it was in one day, he said there was one energy, and then there was a descent of like a cloud onto the earth. Cayce says that exactly. He says 1958 to 1998 were the period of one of the greatest testing periods on the earth plane. But how many of us sense that? Somebody like Sri Aurobindo sensed that. But what work are we doing to be aware of these energies? Is how few realize the vibratory forces as created from one individual to another. How many of you, if you sat next to Jesus on a bus, would even notice, like, man, this dude next to me is kind of cool. You know, I kind of feel that. You know, they call that darshan in India, when you just want to be in the energetic field of a master, that you can sense that peace that's emanated. He says, if you couldn't even feel it from another, how are you going to be able to, yes, what will be the Aquarian Age in your experience? And so we're challenged here here in this reading. And Cayce talks about now is like in Atlantis, like in Lemuria, we're ascending to the possibility of more and more of us being Christ illuminated. But what are we going to do with that? The two other times we fell again. It was that, you know, that one last donut mentality, as opposed to no, let's stay focused on this Christ consciousness and revelation in the earth. The age of purity. In 1998, we find a great deal of the activities as being wrought by the gradual changes coming about. These are at the periods when the cycle of solar activity of the years is related to the sun's passages through the various spheres of activity, become tantamount to the change between the Piscean and the Aquarian Age. This is a gradual, not cataclysmic activity in the experiences of the earth in this period. So we are here moving between those two ages. As to the influences that arise from these astrological sojourns, Cayce talks about how in between lives we do these experiences in other states of consciousness represented by the planets. These are rather in keeping with the time, the Aquarian forces, and as there are the beginning of the Aquarian Age. Remember, thou art in the same sign omens as the mother of him that gave to the earth the physical man, Jesus. Aquarian in its perception, perfection. So here he's telling us that Jesus was born a Pisces by birth, but his mother was the Aquarian. And I think it's interesting because I put the twins because Cayce says they were twin souls. And the story of Adam and Eve talks about how Eve, you know, Adam and Eve were incarnations of symbolic, but there was the first incarnation of the androgynous soul as it cleaved into Jesus and Mary. the story goes that the feminine, Mary, came from the masculine, or came out of that. It's mythological. Of course, that's not exactly what happens, but it's interesting that then the story balances itself, and it talks about how now Jesus comes from the woman, comes from Mary. She came from him, and it balances with him coming from her. That perfection that's symbolized in that story. And then the Aquarian. So we talked about the emotional, and we're moving into an intellectual time. There's all this work that's going on with technology. Aquarius rules technology. And so we've come from this one-on-one kind of love. How did Jesus heal? One at a time. And we're moving into the mindset of the Aquarian, which is more and more healing, mass healing, using technology. Not that it's always, I'm not advocating that it's always the best way, but how are we moving from the one-on-one love and evolving that into a love of humanity? The true brother and sisterhood of all of humankind, which is what we're apparently moving towards with the 1,000 years of peace. So this is this transition, age of self to the age of others, one-on-one to love of humanity, the unconscious fish to the awakened human, the water to the water bearer, which I see as the raw material, the fish or the water of life, but it's going through the water bearer, which now it's being used, now it's being serviced. See, Cayce talks about how advanced Jesus was in his teachings, that he came in the Piscean Age, but he was talking about Aquarian ideals way ahead of time. And so it's 2,000 years later that we're starting to digest these concepts. And now perhaps they're more ready to be assimilated. Now they're ready. ARE is, Cayce's work is taking these deep concepts that Jesus brought forward and then making them more manageable and bite-sized for people to acknowledge. Now one, I'd like to, as we look at the pantheon of avatars that have come into the earth, that without putting in a hierarchy, but looking at what's really different about them. One thing that's very different about Jesus is that if you look at the life of Buddha, the life of Muhammad, the life of Confucius, the life of Lao Tzu, these great masters lived long lives. They had a long depth and breadth of time of their teaching. Jesus had 3 years of public ministry. That's incredible. That's a fact. In 3 years, he had this influence. And Charles Thomas Cayce, on a trip to India, a trip to Israel, talked about his memories of the master. And he said, you know what, towards the end of there, in the last year or so, he hardly spoke. He was Christ illuminated, and in order to stay in that Christ consciousness, he spent a lot of time by himself, just staying in that Christ consciousness. He said, but we talked more and more about him. It was almost like the less he was around, the more his fame grew. And so that when he would speak at that time, the crowds would be much, much larger. And Charles Thomas talked about how the Sea of Galilee was used as an amphitheater, that he and Leslie would take Jesus on a boat to the different shores. And at the shore, there would be thousands of people, and he would come on to the shore, and he would speak to the masses that were gathered there for a while and heal and be himself. And then he would move on to the boat, and he'd move to the different shores. And I don't know if he would do that for days, but there would be, if he felt that his consciousness was descending, becoming earthly, he would withdraw again. He had to make sure that he kept that Christ illuminated consciousness. So he may have had 2 years of public ministry, but maybe that last year was even more powerful because it was almost like he was preparing the group for his death. In a way, he was withdrawing, and so you had a chance to cherish his presence more. If you look at, again, as a psychologist, one of the things you want to do as a psychologist is prepare people for endings. They call it termination. And Jesus does such a beautiful job, in the Last Supper. He says, I'm going to go away for a while, but I'll be back, and you're going to get confused, but I have to go, and I'm going to bring you something back. So bear with me. It's such a beautiful way of preparing. They didn't understand what he was talking about. But as we read the story, you become more aware of that. And so it's from the individual to the collective, and then I'm postulating that Jesus is the bridge between these two ages. And so Jesus completed his earthly cycle. In those 33 lifetimes, remember all the way back from when there was the lost sheep and wanting to show the way out, the culminating kind of experience. When Jesus says it is finished, it's because he has shown in a lifetime how you can stay God-centered. That it doesn't matter what people do. They can spit on you. They can curse you. They can nail you to a cross. And you don't have to have any other feeling but love and forgiveness for them. And I was just talking with Paul this morning, Paul Mazza, and he was talking about how, in his study of Jesus, one of the things that stood out for him is that Jesus held no resentments. It's just, people could do whatever they did, and he just kept going. Just kept, they're fighting over my clothes, Forgive them, for they know not what they do. He didn't lower his consciousness at any time. And so that's the veil being rented. The tearing is the show that, see, in the mind, if you think something's impossible, you can't accomplish it. It's a limiting belief. It's very hard to overcome limiting beliefs. And so the earth consciousness was that earth was like a Roach Motel. You can check in, but you can't check out. It's a one-way entrance. And Jesus checked out of the Roach Motel. And so we were like, whoa, he's leaving? I want to learn how to follow that path. And so that path of oneness, and it's not, I'm not saying that the purpose of incarnation is to check out of the Roach Motel. It's to make the Roach Motel nicer, to fix it up, make the Roach Motel the Roach Bed and Breakfast, and then, kind of upgrade it slowly. But that's what one of the main accomplishments was, that there is now, he's called the incarnation of hope. There was not hope before him. And as he showed the way out, and as he overcame all of these obstacles, it's like, what more could they have done to him and him forgive and be loving and kind? There's so much for us to learn in that and to follow in his footsteps in that path. And that's what we're called to, not to die on a cross, so to speak. I like the Buddhist says that the real crucifixion is not of your body. It's the crucifixion of these earthly snares and desires that trap you. That's what needs to be crucified. Crucify that ego self and ascend into your soul self. Try it out for a little while. Okay? He says, give God a chance. You give him for a chance for a day. He says, try going a day without talking badly about anybody. See how that goes. And then try 2 days, and try that for a week. Wow, you might be onto something. You might begin to awaken that Christ consciousness. And in this time now, it's our turn. The Aquarian, the Piscean, Edgar Cayce. What'd you have to do at Edgar Cayce's time? You had to write a letter, get a reading. Maybe you'd get the reading, maybe you wouldn't. It came through him. The healings that Jesus did, they came through him. This is changing. It's gone from the individual to the collective. The work that I'm doing in the legacy of Edgar Cayce is, I think, I'm an Aquarian by birth. And I think I am helping the next step, which I believe is that I believe that the work that I do with regression isn't so much that you come to me as an oracle, that I teach you to be your own oracle. How you can use hypnosis, like meditation, like dream work, to transcend the ego consciousness and enter into your soul consciousness. And I hope that I give the post-hypnotic suggestions that you keep doing it, that you awaken that within you, that you learn how to enter into trance states of consciousness to move beyond your three-dimensional to fourth to your multi-dimensional reality. So I think that's the new age, or the new age that I'm part of, is that it's no longer going outside of yourself for the doctor or the healer or the guru, that you awaken that inner connection that we all have. How did Edgar Cayce do it? He connected to God. How did Jesus do it? He connected to God. And all of us, though, have that connection. There was a woman who came to me for a regression, and she said, I was very, very intuitively, psychically connected until I had this car accident. And she said, something's off. I don't have it the same. So she went under trance, and she said, oh, I see it. She says, I see these golden threads. And she says, what's happened is this accident has shifted my body in a way, and I just have to connect to that. It's still available to me. I just have to connect to it in a different way. And then she looked around and she said, oh my God, hardly anyone is connected to their golden thread. Hardly anyone. She was shocked that hardly anyone was connected to that. And so she reconnected to that. I haven't heard from her since, nor would I want to. You know, the unfortunate thing about hypnosis work is that it's not a growth business. You know, it's like kind of like one and done. I'm glad that my bread and butter is people that don't want to do spiritual work and they don't want to do hypnosis, and they come each week and good, they pay me. That's how I make my living. If I just did this, I'd be broke. You know, one person at a time. You know, it's not good for a business, this stuff. You know, and that's the, you know, why was one of the primary reasons that they killed Jesus, or they killed these avatars? Because they're bad for business. What's business? It's like, oh, you want to be respected? You need the suit, you need the clothes, you need all this stuff. That's how you're going to show to the world that you're important. And then what does a guy like Jesus say? You don't need any of that. Everything you need is inside you. They're like, kill him, shut him up. That guy, oh my God, nobody's going to buy cars or Ferraris. They're going to just buy, modes of transportation. And so we're living in this time of the thinning of the veil. That's what he meant earlier when he said we're coming back to that time like Christ. There's the thinning of the veil. That's why the work that I do with hypnosis, it's not hard. People are surprised. They think, well, I'm not sure if I can go into a deep trance. You don't have to go in a deep trance. Just try closing your eyes and breathing a little while. Like, oh my God, there I am in Egypt. Yep, exactly. You're there. It's not that hard. You know, there was a woman who she was told in a reading that she had been the sister of the master. And the reading said, you just close your eyes, meditate a little bit, and you will remember that. And Charles Thomas read this reading, and he said, wow, this lady is still alive. And so he went to talk to her about that, and it became an article for Venture Inward. And she was in the tire, is it Sieberling? What was the name of that? Yeah, she was in that very wealthy person. Yeah, one of the big tire companies. And she had access to tremendous wealth and influence. And then when Charles Thomas was talking to her about it, she says, yeah, I did that. And she said, you know what? The first thing I got in touch with is I was mad at him. Our father died. You know, he was sick. You know how embarrassing it is that the oldest son in a Jewish household wasn't there by his family's side? It was embarrassing. He only showed up when he died. And then she said, it took me a little while. I started going to his talks, and I realized he wasn't just my brother. He was the brother. And that was her evolution of that. But she said it was just in little reflections, little memories, remembering her life with the master. But the veil is very thin. You know, one of the things, I believe it's early in the thinning of that, because I'll walk into the ARE and someone will say, Peter, my guides are telling me that you need to eat less pizza. And I'll be, oh, okay. Then I'll go to the library and someone will say, I'm getting this, my guides are telling me that you need to eat more bread with tomato sauce on it. So you got to discern. It's early in this process. So as you listen to other people with their revelations, and even your own, just start to discern, what the movement is. But it is this time of that. And we ought to be exploring that in meditation and seeing what's bubbling forth in us. And then we're in this age of awakening. Oh, good. I thought I go till 10:20? Yeah, okay. So Cayce talked about the 58 to 98 period of testing. So it's coming at the close of the Piscean Age. And remember, the Piscean Age was the age of selfless to the age of selfish. What kind of happened in these years? Was there anything selfish going on in this time? If you think of 58, the 60s kind of started with ideals. And they kind of, what happened in the 60s? Who were our representations of hope? Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, John, he died later. But in the 60s, there was that it was a movement down of hope. You know, one of my favorite stories about Robert Kennedy was that he was in Detroit, I'm pretty sure it was Detroit, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And in major cities around the country, there were riots. Bobby Kennedy went to the ghetto, went to the roughest neighborhoods, and he got on his bullhorn, and he says, "I know how you feel. My brother was also assassinated by a white man." And he spoke to them. He went around that whole night speaking about just trying to say, yeah, you know, Martin Luther King, wonderful man, was killed by a white man. So was my brother, killed by a white man. And that Christ energy. And then for Bobby Kennedy to be assassinated. And so then what happens? Then, you know, when you have trauma, what do you do with trauma? You start numbing it out. You start, you know, drinking a little too much. You start kind of coping. And in the 70s, you know, the me generation, designer drugs. 80s becomes the money generation. You know, by the 90s, the discrepancy between rich and poor has never been broader. The only time it's been greater is now. it's kind of kept going. You know, Cayce talks about how revolution happens when that discrepancy between rich and poor gets too great. But back when revolutions would happen, you know, the king's men and the common people had the same weapons. They don't have that anymore. The king's men got it covered. You can't really have a revolution. But I'm thinking also that this is the time of the spiritual revolution, because I think there's that gap between what's going on spiritually and what's going on materially. And so I think that this is the time. You know, I think that in the future, when they talk about the time that we're living through, they were going to say that was the time of the revolution. You know, there was the American Revolution, you know, with all of the heroes that we have our monuments towards. And I think we are the heroes. I think we're the, you know, Gino's the Nathan Hale of the New Age. You know, Cayce's the Mary Washington of that. Those are going to be the, you know, we are the ones that are here at this time of revolution. You know, the rough and ready individuals that are taking this stuff on. You know, it's not by chance that any of us are here incarnate. You know, Cayce says there's tens of thousands, millions of souls that would like to be incarnate at this time. And they're not here because you are, because you're the chosen one. You're the chosen hope for this birthing of this new age. You know, the plan for this age coming in is through, I guess as it's always been, is through souls, is through incarnations. And hopefully we've learned from these other two attempts that we're coming in preparing for that. You know, the greatest lights are still to come. You know, there's the John, you know, who prepares the way for Jesus to come in. That's in a way who we are. We're the rough and ready. You know, I had a regression where I contacted my guides for the first time. And they showed me myself as a pirate. You know, my Johnny Depp glory, you know. Mustache, greasy, you know, hungover. And I was like, what? Why are you showing me that? You know, why remind me of one of my lower lives? And they said, because you have to integrate that. You know, as Carl Jung would say, that which you suppress, you project outward. He says you have to integrate and love the pirate and the saint. You are all of those. You're both. Everyone is. And he says when you integrate that, then you can be the uniter. Then you can, you know, Jesus was the uniter because he understood earthly incarnations. He had been all. And we all need to incarnate with that. We all need to understand that. And so all of you, you don't need to reject anything of you. You have to love everything of you. And the more you love all those parts of yourself, the more useful you can be in this new age. The more useful you can be. See, one of the things, I can reach certain people. I have a practice of trying to enlighten and enrich people. But you know what? You can reach people that I can't. And you can reach people that I can't. And you can reach people that I can't. We all can reach a certain group of people that each other can't. We all have our own kind of little school shop of souls that we can access. And you saw the reading that John put up there. It's not about curing cancer. It's about one little thing here and there, building momentum line upon line, sharing with the people that you love, the people that are closest to you, being that example. And the people that you see on the bus, just little by little, evolving that. And then Kevin said. You know, the readings about, oh my God, there's war on earth. What can I do? Should I take a plane and help? And the answer was, it might be more useful if you just pray and meditate a little more. Now, what is that? Why does pray and meditate mean more? Now, one of the things that we're going through at this time is a shift in consciousness. And imagine that a room is lit by light bulbs. As each one of us prays and meditates, that light bulb gets brighter. And then imagine that those light bulbs are also like balloons that lift the consciousness. Each one of us here is trying to lift the vibration of the earth. Why? Because like attracts like. The more we can raise the vibration of the earth, the more like higher vibrational souls will be coming in for this transformation, for this 1,000 years of peace that is to come. So each one of us has our consciousness. That's all. We can try to help other people, but the most important part is your consciousness. Raise your light bulb. Be part of the evolution of this consciousness. And as John says, it's about raising the vibration of the womb of the earth so that like attracts like. Lower, more conflicted souls will not be attracted to a higher vibrational earth. And that's the, in a nutshell, the devil is bound and then the devil is released. There's this period of peace that comes to the earth, and then eventually the mixed energy souls come back in, and hopefully it's like a village. I'm simplifying, butchering the book of Revelation, but in essence, that's, if I had to say in a nutshell what I understand of it would be that. So we've got this, it comes to 1998, the period of testing is over, and kind of, I think of it almost like auditions. These were the auditions for the casting for the 1,000 years of peace. We're going to throw all this temptation at you, and nobody is stainless. We all, I was there too. Had a little fun there. And then the next 40 years. Cayce he talked about 1980, but he didn't talk about, the 40 years prior and then the 40 years to come. And that 40 years to come ends in 2038. Now, John's book about the pyramid calendar is 2038. Kirk Nelson's book is about 2026, kind of 12 years prior to that. But I hear, as a uniter, they're both true. Peter, how can that be true? No, he said, one says 2038, one says 2036. How can they both be true? Stay tuned. I speak Spanish, right? And God uses everything that you got. And so when 2011, when 2012 was really hot, now it's not 2012 isn't hot anymore, but 2010, 2011, oh my God, anything that had 2012 on it was selling like hotcakes. And so we were having countless 2012 prophecy conferences, and we brought a Mayan elder, official, real Mayan, part of the inner council, Apu of that tradition, and he didn't speak English that well, and he spoke Spanish. And so I got to be a couple of days, like a week, kind of taking care of this guy. Ari asked me to kind of special him, just wherever he went. He had the best dirty jokes. Off mic, I'll tell you all of them. And then I was also present with him with all these interviews that he would give. And people would ask the same questions. And so sometimes he'd say in Spanish, Peter, you know what to say. And then, I'd give a long answer and people would be like, he said that? But one of the things that he talked about, he said, this was in private, he says, you guys make such a big deal out of 2012. There's not going to be cataclysmic nothing. 2012, it's just an energetic change. He says, what we're focusing on, and we keep it kind of quiet, but what we're looking at is 2038. He says, that's the real important time. And he says, it's really the time between 98 and 2038. Their belief is that if we can make it to 2038, we're going to be out of the woods. We're going to be out of the forest. And I said, well, you know that the pyramid calendar goes to 2038. And he said, no, I didn't know that. So here you have these two connecting principles. How does it connect with 2026? Well, what he said is that the way that the Mayans measured time in like 715 different ways, and he said one of the ways is that they do 13-year cycles. And so he says 2012, 2025, 2038. So he says the first 13-year cycle, he says that's like the first 13 years of a child. So they're not going to get that into that much trouble. But between 2026 to 2038, that's when there can be more trouble gotten into, from 13 to, to 25. And so so you can see how then Kirk's measurement and John's both are important markers if you look at it from this Mayan perspective. And so we're all here living through this 80-year period of intense possibility and transformation of this. Will we awaken to this oneness? That's the challenge. What will you do each day or today to awaken that within you, and then to help others with that process? And here's Cayce talking about the example of oneness. When Jesus is teaching and they say, "Hey, Jesus, your mom and your brother are here." And he says, everyone here is my mother and brother. He had entered that oneness consciousness. They were all one to him. So following the water bearer, remember we started with that? Follow the water bearer. And so we're all here, we have followed the water bearer, or we're in the age of the water bearer. The Prince of Peace, the one who showed us the way. Will we now take our turn? We've had so many great teachers, whether you're Buddhist or Confucianist or Islamic. Will you follow the teachings towards that Christ consciousness, awakening oneness within you? We're all playing catch up. It says, catch up with Jesus. Let us praise and relish him, because he loves me from my head to my toes. I take your pictures. Did you want me in the picture too? Oh, you don't want me in the picture? All right. And there he is. What a beautiful man. What a beautiful man. All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was so wonderful. Go out and have a break. We'll have a wonderful